right here we have Leo about to attempt this barbell squat. And one of the nice things about Leo is he hits depth pretty quick. And one of the reasons why that's the case has to do with his levers. His thighs are just a little bit shorter than a traditional athlete's would be. So in that case, it makes the movement go a little bit more quick. So how is this possible? Let's investigate. Welcome to harvestingstrength.com. Welcome to Harvesting Strength. Today we're going to talk about lever distance and how it relates to squatting and meeting depth. I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through an example on the board, mathematically calculating arc length, and to discuss that lever distance of the femur and how it could potentially lengthen or reduce the amount of time it takes for you to hit depth with squat. So let's check it out. All right, hey guys, so we're going to talk about the arc distance on the squat. Okay, so arc distance kind of sounds like the term of itself. Arc distance is going to be where we have that rounded motion. So imagine you're doing the squat, and as you squat, you're standing up top, you're standing erect. And as you squat, the hips go behind and create that kind of arcing motion, kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the video. But nonetheless, so the big issue we have is when we're trying to develop a movement biomechanically, sometimes we're going to be genetically predisposed to certain outcomes. So an easy one to kind of talk about is, let's say, bench press. I have shorter arms and like a thicker chest cavity, hashtag blessed, I guess. But nonetheless, shorter arms and a thicker chest cavity means that range of motion I have has decreased. So my bench press might last, inches less than someone who has long arms. So, whenever whenever you think about football players versus basketball players, a football player is going to, generally attract a bigger athlete. And I would imagine if a bigger athlete has a bigger body, bigger chest, that range of motion would be different than a basketball player who is, longer levers to help them jump, rebound, play the sport. I would assume most football players bench press more than basketball players. And that just comes down to biomechanics. Not really just comes down to, but that's a big factor. So something we hear a lot about is, hitting depth in the sport of, powerlifting, strength, et cetera. What we're trying to do right here is we're trying to show you from a mathematical standpoint with arc length how we can discuss the fact that people who have shorter levers, in this case a shorter femur, the shorter the femur is, the less distance they really have to travel. So I've kind of broke this down into some notes. Obviously I've already talked for a couple minutes to kind of start the conversation, but let's see mathematically the difference between a shorter femur, a longer femur, the whole movement in general, and just kind of break down some of that information so you can kind of understand why these things work out the way they do. So let's say that, putting this down, the lever distance of this individual, okay, let's say from the hip joint to the knee joint, okay, just kind of, it's not exactly accurate, but let's say from there to there, I measure 16 inches, okay? So it's really tiny to see, but at the bottom, you can see all this math right here, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's say the femur, okay, from hip joint to knee joint, that distance is going to be, let's see, little dots to have better understanding. Let's say that's 18 inches, okay? So the difference here is 2 inches. Now, I didn't make these numbers from specific people. They're very arbitrarily done. This is just to have a good conversation about it. But nonetheless, to find arc distance, okay, which is the distance around a circle or a portion of the circle, to find that distance, we have to utilize the formula, which would be 2 pi r, okay? And then your central angle over 360 degrees. 2 pi r represents circumference. So if you're not, a traditional mathematician, 2 pi r is how you find the distance around the circle. But whenever we include the central angle of what we're trying to measure, now we're talking about what portion of the circle we're trying to measure. And when we do strength sports, or we're talking about the squat, the biggest thing that defines your squat is going to be if you hit 90-degree angle. So if you, hit parallel with the ground or break parallel, we're just going to call it 90 degrees for now, just to make this mathematically easier. But whenever we're trying to measure that portion of a circle, 90 degrees, that's where we're going to change this math to 90 right there. So as you can see, 2 pi r, okay, with our central angle over 360 degrees, this formula is replicated on both sides. So we're going to change r to 16 inches. We're going to change r on this one to 18 inches to represent the difference in femur sizes, okay? So we got 16 and 18 right here, all right? So whenever I perform the math on this, I'm going to change this to 90, change that to 90, because we're trying to figure out what's the arc length of 90 degrees for a person with a radius of 16 or 18 inches. We're going to calculate that to find the total distance. Now, why I call my radius 16 inches in relationship to this diagram is because if you think about it, okay, pretend like there is a circle being built, okay? The radius of this circle is 16 inches, same as right here. Now again, this is not the best artwork, but what should happen is that this circle should be less than this circle. They both look the same. It's really sloppy art, but if you could, kind of roll with me on this whole, not analogy, but this example, you can kind of think, oh, okay, well, if this has a smaller radius than this one, then the circles should be different in sizes. But let's go ahead and just fast forward. To review what we're talking about, femur distance, the lever, this is our radius. We're using arc length to discuss the proportion of the circle for 90 degrees. So if I was to measure the distance of the hips from being erect down to 90 degrees, I could do this math right here, grab my notes because I did it in advance. This value of 2 pi r, which is changed to 16, that should be 105, okay, or 100.5 if I was to round that. And then 90 over 360, when you do math, sometimes it's nice to see fractions or decimal forms, but whenever you simplify that, that comes out to 0.25. Or if you're traditional with your math, you can keep it like that fraction. But if you were to bring these both together, you would get a value of 25.1, okay? So the arc distance would be 25.1 units. We would actually call it inches, I guess, since we're measuring in inches. So then when we talk about the descending motion, okay, it's gonna be 25.1 inches. But let's go ahead and finish this math. When you descend with the bar, you also have to ascend. So we're not only talking about how far you have to go down, but how far you have to go back up. So we have to double this number, okay? We have to know the total distance. And that total distance is 50.1 inches. So that's my total distance of the bar when I hit 90 degrees and back up. But now if I work on this side, okay? So now I'm gonna reduce this, and I'm gonna make this 113.1, which is bigger than 100.5. Okay, so we know the math's gonna be pretty much different. If I was to simplify this out completely, that'd be 28.3 inches. But then, like I talked about before, the descending motion, although it's 28.3, we have to double this, and that's gonna make this come out to 56.5 inches. So what's the difference between 50.1 and 56.5? The difference is 6.4 inches. So that's a lot, that's a big difference, okay? The bar distance is gonna be really, really different in that case. So now you can mathematically see when you change the lever distance, how much you change the bar's path. And we've all felt this before if we're lifters. Even an inch lower in range makes a huge difference in our performance with the barbell squat. All right, so right here we have Joe performing the barbell squat. He's one of the finest lifters in Michigan. I actually just met him a few weeks ago, and he's got a big passion for the sport. But right here, we're looking at him meeting depth, or, well, breaking depth, however you want to perceive it. We're looking at this movement right here at the bottom of the squat, and we talked about previously how the hips and the knee joint are creating that radius for that arc motion, that arc length that occurs from when the hips ascend and descend. Now, if you notice, his knees do shift forward, so it's not representing the most perfect scenario, but in the end, there still is some representation of that arcing motion. So right here, we're at the bottom of the lift, and this is what really tells us if the lifter was successful or if they were unsuccessful. So that's a big understanding of strength and if you are achieving the goal of hitting the barbell squat. Right here, I marked this with an arrow. We're talking about the distance between the knee joint and the hip. We mentioned it before. That's going to represent the radius in regards to arc length. So we need the radius in order to calculate, what is the motion, that circular motion from being at that erect position downward. So we measured from the knee joint to the hip, and it was about 16.25 inches. Now, this was probably not the most accurate measurement, but we're going to use it just to show you guys the mathematical process. But what's happening here is we're kind of making note on the fact that the knees do slide forwards and backwards, so it's not the perfect representation of the arc length, but we're still going to calculate it as if it was the true, arcing motion and created the perfect scenario from a geometrical standpoint. So how we work this is the formula is 2 times pi times your radius, which is 16.25. And you take that value, and then you're going to multiply that with the value of your central angle over 360. Because hitting parallel or breaking parallel is 90 degrees, well, it's not exactly 90 degrees if you're breaking parallel. We'll put 90 over 360. So if I were to calculate those values, it would give me to 25.5 inches. That came from 2 times pi times 16.25 times the ratio of 90 over 360. So if I was to document how long this movement lasted, it would have been about 51 inches. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and getting a glimpse of how this mathematical mindset can really affect your movements and how how it could make you successful or it could hinder your performance. But in the end, this isn't just meant to be a video to allow you to make an excuse so that when people ask you, hey, how much do you squat? You can't say, well, because I'm taller, it's kind of harder and I can only do blah, blah, blah. If someone asks you what you squat, just tell them 360, 500, 600, 800, 250. What does it matter? Put the egos aside and just understand that this was just allowing you to understand and thrive better off of, learning why certain things are the way they are and how you might seem to be a bigger individual than the next person, in the squat rack next to you. And, it might seem like, hey, I should be able to squat more. Why am I struggling? Sometimes we're just genetically predisposed to, different body types, and it could negatively affect our performance, but that doesn't mean that you have to just stick with that notion. Anytime that happens, that's just an opportunity for you to get better. And my whole goal was just to provide knowledge for you guys so that you can, better understand your circumstance. But like I said before, it's no excuse. You just gotta get better, and you gotta thrive off that adversity. I know that for me with deadlift, I think, at one point when I was in my high school career, I got stuck at about 500 pounds, and I would usually lose meets at deadlift because my arms were shorter and the distance of the bar had to go much further than, my peers, it would have to for my peers. But whenever I figured that out, I was just like, I just gotta get better. I gotta find a way around it. And, thankfully through the help of, some mentors and having that chance to get better, I eventually grew into deadlifting 575, 585. And then, throughout my early career in college, I was going, 6'10", 6'20", 6'30", and then about a week ago, I got to 6'50". So even though your structure isn't potentially made to make you, the best at a certain movement, you just got to keep thriving and getting better. So I hope you appreciate the video. Check out my website, harvestingstrength.com, for more details, more information. Click the bell on the video so you get more updates on the videos as they upload. And I hope you guys have a good holiday. All right, so check you guys later, and thanks again for your support. Thank you all so much for checking out my video. To find more content, check out my website, harvestingstrength.com. Right now, if you go to my store, I have just released my new ebook, Bench Press Bully. Talks about tips for precision and has an 8-week program within that book. So check it out. Go to the store if you want a direct link, harvestingstrength.com/ebook. Thank you guys so much and appreciate the support.